Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We'll have a look at ayah 29 of Surah al-Baqara then, and probably going to spend quite a little bit of time on it, because it's a very interesting and important ayat, and a number of concepts come from that. So Allah says there that Allah has created for you everything on earth, and then turned to the heaven or to the skies and shaped it into 7 heavens, and He knows everything. Now, to start with, when it says Allah created for you, and of course He's addressing people. So there's the first thing that comes from it, is that whatever is on earth is there for the benefit of people. That's the first concept that is in that ayat, because Allah says lakum, for you. He created for you what is on earth altogether, everything that is on earth. So the culmination, the purpose of earthly life is human life. Human life is not just an interlude or accident or something in between, and then, you know, we're going to be taken over by robots, or what all kinds of people have this idea. So no, the whole purpose is human life, and to have this environment in which humans can live and be tested. And Allah says elsewhere as well, He submitted to you everything on earth. So He made us in charge of it, of course not to abuse it, but rather as trustees. But He made us in charge of what is on earth. He made us capable of subduing what is on earth. Now, for a physically quite weak creature, that is not a natural thing, is it? That normally you wouldn't think that, you know, a person tames an elephant, or scares off a tiger, or manages to dig tunnels through mountains, take the submarine to the bottom of the seafloor and come up with some specimen of until then unknown sea creatures, or take to the skies all the way, you know, and above, and explore the outer atmosphere and so on. I mean, that you wouldn't expect that, and of course it's only possible because Allah has given us that authority, that power. He has given us that ability and the intellect to contrive mechanisms to do that, and the ability to think ahead and think logically and use tools and so on. So it's a very profound statement. Now, of course, if everything on earth has been made for us, there is a discussion in the Tafsir that deals with this wrong assumption that means you can do with it what you want, that everything's halal for you. That is not the case. Just because everything is for our benefit doesn't mean there aren't any restrictions. There are restrictions because, of course, certain things, if we actually do not keep away from them, are harmful, whether it's poisonous plants or whatever it is. There are things that are not for our benefit directly, but are nonetheless necessary in the wider picture for sustaining the whole thing. And so we're not talking about disjointed items on earth. We're talking about the whole complete system being for our benefit. From there on, we then get to this next statement, that then He turned to the heavens. Now, to start with, the word istawa has a number of meanings, and the original meaning is to elevate, to rise above something, but that meaning is not intended here. So we're not talking about Allah rising up to the heavens from the earth. That is not what is intended here. In an implied meaning, istawa means to approach something, to, in that sense, get on, move towards it. So to proceed as a next stage. Now, if we take that meaning, then what you have is this idea that the heavens were created after the earth. However, and this is quite complicated, elsewhere in the Qur'an we have this idea that the earth is created after the heavens. And it appears as if these two don't quite match, if there is a different thing being said here and there. And so, when you look at all these ayahs and discuss them, you inevitably, with this ayat, start discussing this idea of the sequence of creation. So the books of Tafsir will go into quite some detail as to how they, in those days, before any space exploration and so on, saw the sequence of creation. And many of those concepts are valuable, and many of those concepts are, of course, oversimplistic. For example, you will find that because Allah created everything from water, His throne was placed above water, and of course all living beings have water as the initial building block. So we're starting with Allah creating everything from water. So naturally they thought, well, the earth rests on the back of a big fish, right? Of course he holds it up, in the water. So they see the universe as a fluid. Now in many ways it is, but not quite like that. So some of these concepts are, of course, oversimplistic, but an interesting pattern nonetheless emerges, and it's not necessarily a field that I feel competent on commenting, but if you look at it and compare with what we now know, it still throws up some interesting parallels. So Allah creates everything from water. There is, of course, also this discussion that first He created the pen to order it to write the decree, and then these ideas, we need to look at them as symbolized language, not just, when people discuss it in that way, not just as simplistic understandings of the creation, but they actually express certain concepts. Because there is first the utterance of be, and then it is. That there is an act of creation. Of course, Allah could just have it all there, but He actually, by making it a sequence, first He says be, and then it is, He actually establishes creation as a process in time. So, this idea that He creates the pen first to write down the decree and then bring it about is sensible, because it actually expresses the thought that creation first exists as a plan and then is carried out in practice, in real terms, in the material world. So the idea precedes the implementation. So these are not just fancy ideas of how the world came about, but they express quite some deep thoughts and truths as well. But leaving that aside, the understanding is that from this primordial water, or whatever you would want to call it, Allah first then created the heavens in the sense of a single what is described as smoke, a single mass, smoky or dust or whatever mass of matter that is not shaped, but is just this substance from which the universe is subsequently built. And that then he creates the earth. In other words, he creates the earth and the like of it. So we have other planets as well. And again, and I'm not getting into it at this stage. There is this discussion that there might well be, just like there are 7 heavens and we come to the 7 heavens, but that there are also 7 earths and so on, and that there might be different, similar life experiences like ours and so on, and what that might mean. But he then creates the earth, so he then creates the actual physical planet. And then he spreads out, then he turns to the heavens and shapes them into distinct 7 heavens. And the 7 I get to in a moment. But he then structures the universe, as it were, because from this mass, now that it's got its planets, and then it gets structured into layers, and then returns to shaping the earth by, as it were, making it inhabitable and so on and so forth, and then proceeds to the creation of life on earth and so on. And we have the whole 6 days of creation and the 7th on which he then rises to place himself on the throne, to govern over it, rather than in the Christian theology that he takes a day of rest, which he has no need of. So there is following from this ayat naturally, because of this idea that he created the earth for us and then shaped the heavens, a discussion of the various stages of creation. And we'll get back to that inshallah at a later stage when we get to the ayahs that do say then, he created the heavens in 2 days and was on earth in another in 4 days, and and so on, and look at these time periods. Now, when Allah says 7 heavens, then of course the question is, why 7? And what does 7 mean? And that is, again, quite a deep and complicated subject. 7 can be taken literally, maybe, but more likely it is a allegorical number. In many ways, 7 stands for endless, eternal. We use it, what some people say, the magic 7, yes, the mythical 7 as a number. We use it in language always if we express a whole complete system, the 7 seas. You have it in the Christian tradition. You have the 7 virtues and the 7 vices. You have the 7 cardinal sins, these kind of things. 7 expresses the completeness of something with all its facets, and in a way has this element of eternity to it. You can't add anything to it. It's rounded up. It's all of it. So in that sense, you could say 7 heavens means he made them perfect, complete, rounded up, full. There is no further development in that sense. The next thing that will happen is that he rolls it up again, but it's not further expanding. It's no longer, it's not incomplete. That creation is complete. Now, what do we mean by heaven to start with? And I come back to the number 7 in a moment, because of course that number 7 has further significance. So what I want to do is actually deal with this whole idea of numbers. What is the significance of some of the initial numbers that we use? But what do we mean by heavens, first of all? We don't, of course, mean just the sky above us, which is just what we see through the atmosphere into space. An indicator of that is when we have another ayah in the Qur'an where Allah says that we have ornamented the lowest heaven with stars. This gives us the idea that the universe that we know is the lowest heaven. Our known, or we don't even know it fully, we just started to look into it and know a little bit of it. We haven't been able to explore it. We come up with some interesting ideas and realize that it's not just empty space, that the space actually is structured in a honeycomb structure, from what I've read, and that it's actually organized. There is matter, there is antimatter, there is all kinds of things happening there, energy, and so it's not just empty space with a few suns, meaning stars and planets, but there is actually quite a lot more to it. It's certainly organized, structured, created, not haphazard. But the whole universe that we are familiar with, or we can imagine, is the lowest heaven. So the others are dimensions beyond that. Now, whether what they say about quasars or black holes, one is the opposite of the other, either new energy or matter coming into creation, or it being sucked up and just disappearing into we don't know where. We know there are barriers or boundaries to our universe where it moves on to somewhere else. We don't know what it is. Whether that is the next level or not. But so when we talk about 7 heavens, or whatever unperceivable number of layers of heavens, of dimensions, we actually are talking about dimensions beyond our physical universe. And when, for example, the revelation descends, when we know that the book is first put into the lower heaven and then from there given to the angel Jibreel and revealed to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, then we understand that the word of Allah initially comes from a completely different realm. And for us to receive it, for it to be transmitted to the angel, to the Prophet, peace be with him, it first of all has to enter our universe. So we're talking really about completely different levels where different rules apply. That is no longer the material world that we're familiar with. The heavens above that are a world that we have no idea about. Yes, we know from some hadiths and that, but generally a world that is not our existence, not our home, not where we could easily, that is not accessible to us. That is only accessible to us after our death. The soul can penetrate, but as physical beings we can't. So it gives us an idea to start with of the vastness of creation, because even that lowest heaven we haven't quite fully understood. It's interesting also, coming back to this number 7, that even people like Einstein talk about 7 dimensions and things like that of the universe. So I don't quite understand what he means by it. There are, strictly speaking, really only the 4 dimensions. He I think takes time as a 5th dimension, but that is not quite correct. Time is something completely different. time is not a dimension in that sense. Time is, Allah is time in many ways. Time is not from this world. You can't measure it in this world. Time is not a fixed dimension. Time is changeable. But I don't want to get into that right now either, because the Islamic concept of time is a time-space continuum. We don't separate it. So sometimes time can expand, sometimes it can reduce. But we can, of course, in many ways express distance in time, because we have that in the Qur'an. So this idea of measuring a distance in the universe in light years is not a new idea either. It's an Islamic concept, because Allah says that the order passes between the heaven and the earth in a day that the measure is 50,000 years of what we count, and so we have it in some hadiths mentioned that between each heaven there is this distance of 50,000 years. So this concept that you can count distance in time is an old Islamic concept. It's not something new that came about with Einstein or his relativity theory or whatever. But interestingly, he talks about 7 dimensions. You look at people who do psychology of learning, and they come up with that we have somehow 7. Our memory capability is measured in 7 stages, and all kinds of interesting things. The number 7 is a crucial number. It crops up everywhere. It is the stages of development. I mean, not just that we have 7 days, the stages of human development. If you look at a child, I think it's 7 weeks until their first teeth, then another 7 till they can sit, another 7 till they can stand, that sort of thing. Or you look at the larger development, you can divide the ages of man into 7, 7 years of childhood, another 7 years, then you get into adolescence, then the 7 years somebody becomes a young man, and then so you count them in 7s, then middle age, and then full strength, and then you start the decline. You have to turn at 42, as it were, and then move on from there. These and the lifespan of a person is effectively 63 years. Yeah, it can extend from there, but that is the sort of rough lifespan, which is 9 times 7. Yeah? So that figure, 7 wonders of the world, whatever, it comes up everywhere. So what I want to do is look at this idea of numbers as such, because numbers aren't just fancy inventions by mathematicians. The ability to use numbers is the ability to relate things to each other. And numbers take on a meaning, also a metaphysical meaning. And that metaphysical meaning in the earlier days used to be expressed in geometry rather than algebra. Of course, algebra is that you can calculate with numbers. And when you calculate with numbers, you can do all kinds of things, and it helps bypassing the need to do everything by trial and error. If you build, and you have to get it right with a compass and that, and get things level, that is very tricky, and you approximate things. But if you can calculate it and measure it, of course it's easier. But initially it is all expressed in geometry, because geometry tells us about the relationships between physical objects. Yeah, basically length, width, height, and how they relate to each other. So geometry deals on a plane view with the physical reality. that we have around us, and is of course relevant for building, for architecture, but also for understanding the world. And the zero doesn't figure in that. The zero is a very useful introduction to algebra, but in geometry the zero doesn't really exist. Because nothing doesn't exist. Everything starts with one. Everything starts with Allah. Because He creates from nothing. But everything starts with one. So if you look at numbers, the one represents the beginning. That's where you start with. And there is only one beginning. There is only Allah as a beginning. So you could put a point in the middle of a circle, and you have Allah as the center point, and you have all the created world around that. Yeah? So you start with that concept, that everything starts from somewhere, and that is the beginning. Now, once you have creation, and we've just talked about this, He created everything on earth for you, and the creation and shaping it and so on. Once you have creation, you have, of course, some other point. In fact, you have lots of other points, because there's not just one thing that's created, but lots of things that are created. You can look at these as the points on the circumference of the circle. And of course, what you do next, you draw the radius, in that you connect these 2 points. So you now have a linear situation. The number 2 expresses the other. And Allah has created, and He has created everything in pairs. So 2 expresses the doubling. Creation, yes, everything in pairs, and then from there it multiplies. 2, 4, 8, you get the exponential growth, cell division, and so on. So there is no other one after one. The moment you have creation, you move on, you have 2. You now carry on in pairs. Yeah? So you now get a line, and of course that line expresses also the relationship between creation and Allah. We come from Him, we return to Him, we are on the straight path to Him. Yeah, we've been through that. However, we now get not just logically with 1 and 1 and then another 1 is 3, but the 3 is also a very important number, and that is because on a line you can really not define where you are. Let's say you are somewhere on that line now. You cannot possibly describe precisely where in space you are, yeah, in the created world, without a third reference point. So you need another, and that's what we call triangulation. You do that in land measurement, for example. You can only establish the precise location of any one point against 2 others. You have to have a third point in order to be able to triangulate. You can say, well, now you have your third point, you can then, from there, establish precisely where you are on your line. So a third point is necessary for a fix of a location. And so, even so, of course, we object to the Trinity. The number 3 is quite an important one in Islam as well. And it crops up in many places. And we do things 3 times often and so on. Where the Christian Trinity, of course, gets it wrong is that it muddles up that third point. And if we come back to this idea, Allah and His creation, and makes Allah part of His creation, by being part of it at the same time and being separate with it. That doesn't work. But we have in Islam our own understanding of this triangular concept by, for example, the introduction of the angel Jibreel. Allah does not talk to us directly. He talks to us through a messenger. So the messenger, the angel, takes what is with Allah and translates it so it is then accessible to the Prophet or to humanity. It's not direct, because Allah is not of our kind. The communication has to be through that form of translation, or the message is carried through that way. So we also have these concepts in some way. And again, there's a lot that spins off from that. I don't want to go into it because we get stuck at the number 3, for the rest of the evening. Just the number 3 again, and maybe one day we'll do, but there is a lot that relates to that. But importantly, we only get into a spatial relationship. We only really get a fixation of any point in geometry if we have 3 points. We need 3 points to define anything. Yeah? And this is where, of course, then you start. In the circle, with triangulation, this is where your trigonometry and all that stuff comes from. You start working out the relationships in a circle. Because the circle is then divided into various triangles. And of course you use unilateral triangles, triangles that have the same radius, at the same, 2 sides are the same because you're working from the radius. And then there are many ways of establishing relationships, because in the end, one of the key aims of geometry in the old days was to square the circle. You've heard that expression, yeah? And it's impossible to square the circle. I mean, a circle and a square, you can't make them the same, but you can approximate them. Now, the idea of squaring a circle is that you want to achieve a circle that has the same area as the square, and you want to approximate such, so you could try and circle around the square and you could circle in the square, and somewhere in between is your ideal circle. That you find a value where actually the radius of the circle, the relationship to that of what is the base of your square. Again, I don't want to go, and it's not my strong subject either, into geometry, but you can see that there are some intriguing relationships, and these are not pursued simply because they are fun to pursue, intriguing to the mind, but they are pursued because they are intended to express metaphysical relationships. Because squaring the circle means bringing the circle of life into the square is our earthly existence, the 4 directions, north, south, west, east. This is the 4, yes, this is the circle. Of course, when you split the 2, we now have the 4 directions. This is us, our world. The circle is the whole life cycle. You want to bring them into harmony. So it's not just a geometrical exercise, it is actually a quest for the truth. And you will find that a lot of buildings, whether it's the pyramids or any other, well-known ancient sacred buildings, are built on concepts that relate. On the one hand, of course, they're orientated towards certain stars and geographically and that. On the other hand, they try and express those relationships, those geometrical relationships. There's also the idea of the golden ratio, where you have a ratio where the relationship between portions of the circle to other portions, you have the radius and the circumference and so on, but that relationship is ideal, and again that plays a great part in sacred architecture to actually try and transform that into building and express those concepts, those realities, those ideas of our building is intended there, just like the steeple wants to reach to the sky, and so on. Building is intended to define our place in the cosmos. Now, I'll just rush through it because I'm after the number 7. We got to the number 4. The number 5, if we just go through them, and of course all the odd numbers are also prime numbers that aren't divided by anything else at this stage. So we really, all the way up to 7, we deal with prime numbers in the odd numbers. The 2, of course, multiplies, but 3, 5, and 7 aren't divisible by anything else. After that, the 9 is. 11 isn't, so again it becomes an interesting number. So does 13. But the number 5 often expresses the idea of man within the universe. Because if you have on top the head and then left and right the arms and then the feet, that gives you sort of the idea of man. That pentagram is used in that very often, sort of magic and witchcraft use the pentagram a lot, calling the jinn and things like that, because they relate those points of the pentagram, of the 5-pointed star, to positions astronomically with the stars, and then they work out, destinies and things like that. But again, I don't want to dwell on that, but it's an interesting concept in itself. Let's jump from the number 4 to the number 6. Now, number 6, of course, is on the one hand, depending on how you do it, you have the division of the circle again into 6 equilateral triangles and so on, and there are your 360 degrees divide into 60 degrees. That's how we get our 60 minutes for the hour and things like that, because after all, the earth is also a circle, and you divide it, and then of course the movement of it translates into time. And of course we get our 12th system also from that, because if you divide the 360, 3 times 12 is 36. Yes, you divide it into further smaller units. This is the smaller divisible units. 60 divided by 5, you have your 12. So it's not without reason that we 12 hours for the day and 12 hours for the night, that we have these further divisions of time. But again, so what 6 really stands for, and I know this all sounds a little bit confusing, and we're really just dabbling here, because there is a lot to look into that, and you really have to start doing your geometry properly, and here we just really looking at it very, very rushedly in just showing that these numbers have deeper meanings. Then you have your 4 directions: forward, backward, left, right, and now you add up and down. Then you have the 3-dimensional world. So Al-Ghazali said man has 6 directions. And And in that he established that we live in a three-dimensional world, because we have the three axes. Yeah? We have the longitudinal, the lateral, and the vertical axis. We have forward, backward, left, right, so lateral, sidewards, and we have up and down. And of course it's that up and down that adds the dimension of trying to get away from just a plain Earth existence. We actually try and make contact with what is above us. So there's a spiritual question there as well. So the 6 represents in many ways our three-dimensional world. And what is above that is the 7. So the 7 represents what goes beyond our three-dimensional world. So the 7 is, by definition, the spiritual number. Because up to 6 we're dealing with the world. These are our mundane, worldly numbers. The 7 becomes a sacred number because it adds the spiritual dimension. It adds another 1 to the 6. It extends. And of course, again, interestingly, for example, the pi, which defines for you the relationship between the radius and the circumference of a circle, is seen as 22 over 7. Because inside a circle it would be 21 over 7, the 3 again outside, because you measure the circle not exactly in degrees but in radials. Your radials is what comes off, and then you have, we dealt with tangents, and you have these various relationships. It's slightly more. So, but back to 7. The 7 really is that number that expresses the completion, because man is not just a physical three-dimensional being, but we also spiritual. So 7 completes. And interestingly, I've been told that if you had a building with 7 sides, its echo characteristics are such that sound bounces off and travels the longest. It's the most ideal for repetitive, echoing. So there's this eternal element again. But what we then have is with 7 the cycle it completes 6 days of creation, for example, and then the 7s, the divine rule over creation. Creation is not left to its own devices as just something floating in space and that's it. No evolutionary idea there, no secularist non-purpose. There is a purpose, Allah rules over it. So this completes the whole concept, and that's why we deal in everything in octaves. Octaves is 8. Yeah? The 8th starts a new cycle. In music you have 7 notes and then you repeat again. You complete an octave when you start at the same note again, but 1 level up. And the same in many other fields. You have this idea of a 7 always completes a system, and then you start again with the 8th. Of course, 8 is naturally the new start, because if you take a square or a cube, of course, if you take 4 and you raise it, then you have 8. Yeah, if you take a square into a cube. But more importantly, if you take a square with the sides of the unit of 1, yeah. So now you have a cube with sides of 1. If you double that to 2 in each direction, you end up with 8. Yeah? The volume. So to double a cube,
you get to the next level. Same thing again, yeah? It's a logical. So a cube with a unit, side unit of 1 times 1 times 1, yeah, has the volume of 1 cubic. Whatever it is, meter or centimeter, it doesn't matter, 1 cubic, yeah? You double the sides, you now have a cube of 2 times 2 times 2, so you have 8 cubic meter or whatever. So you fit 8 cubes of 1 into a cube with the side of 2. So there again you have this, yeah, you start a new cycle. You can fit 7 in there before you have another complete cube. And of course the cube also represents our 3-dimensional world. Yeah? And within 1, let's say, dimension or 1 complete system, you can fit 7 in. The 8th one makes it a new start. You have a new one again. You start all over again. So 7 is that number of completion. And so when Allah says 7 heavens, it's complete. It's not incompleted. Of course, we have the Kaaba as a cube as well, because it represents that. And the throne, but we get to that at a different ayat, is carried by 8 angels.
The world is going to be destroyed. What's going to happen to the Kaaba?
I don't know what's going to happen to the Kaaba when the world gets destroyed. We know its treasures are going to be plundered by somebody, and there are various. But no, I mean, I don't want to speculate what happens. But I'm really just interested in these concepts right now of geometrical space, and of course the cube is our 3-dimensional world as well, just like the 6 directions. So there is a relationship there. But Allah's throne is above the physical world. If it's carried by 8, you know, it's above that created 3-dimensional world. He's not part of the created 3-dimensional world as other belief systems would have us assume. He is separate from his creation. So when you look at it in this sense, and I don't want to go beyond now. I mean, the other numbers have some, you know, the 9 as well. There is something in that as well. There are still, but really also you end up with multiplications of existing numbers, and patterns come from that. But I think taking it that far, what basically you see is that there is a interesting expression in those numbers. Those numbers aren't just numbers. Those numbers are an attempt at expressing and realizing relationships between our world and the cosmic world above us that we cannot understand. And just to take that a little bit further is that obviously the knowledge of geometry was very essential for spirituality. People understood these concepts. They could visualize things in that way much easier than expressing it in words like we do now. And these things meant something for them. And the people who had that knowledge, and at some stage, because it was considered dangerous knowledge, it got forbidden. And the people who kept that knowledge were the people who built the buildings, the sacred buildings. They still knew. This is where this whole idea of the Masons comes from. Yeah, because why is it the Masons who keep the sort of secret knowledge of religion? Of course, they've pervaded since few hundred years. The idea is, you see, the Temple of Solomon. Solomon, nobody else, the original lord of the room that gave him the power over the jinn and everything. Yeah? So even these ideas have some substance, some truth in them. But of course people don't always realize where they come from. But it was the Masons who had that knowledge. and kept that secret and didn't divulge it because it wasn't, people didn't when certain religious ideas got persecuted. So this is where the whole idea of Masonry comes from. Why Masons? Because they are the ones who built the temple and knew why it was built in what way. Just like the people who built the pyramid knew why they built in a particular way. There is a lot in that geometry. And likewise, when we deal with Islamic patterns, with arabesques and with ornamentation, and also the building style of a mosque, why there is actually a square or a cube section, and then there is a dome, a circular, a spherical shape on it, and then there is a minaret, the final extension. People don't understand it anymore and start building some ugly mosques just because they think, why not have a mosque in modern kind of architectural design, and it doesn't work, it doesn't fit, the proportions aren't right, and so on and so forth, because these are sacred proportions in many ways. Our geometrical patterns in Islam is not like people say just because images were forbidden and so people have to throw shapes. That's not quite the case. Geometrical patterns are an expression of truth. They are an attempt of getting to the truth. You will find always that, for example, they are never complete. Islamic patterns are always repetitive but never complete. They always spill over the border, as it were. They always cut off not at the end of the shape but in the middle of it, indicating that it will perpetuate, it goes on and on, that pattern, that our perception of reality is incomplete. We only have a window on reality. We do not have full access to everything. We don't have full knowledge. Allah has full knowledge, which then brings us to the end of the ayat. Because after Allah says He created for you everything that is on earth, and then He turned to the heavens and shaped them into 7 heavens, and He has knowledge of all things. So, unlike us who only have little knowledge, limited knowledge, and only try and discover some of it, Allah has full knowledge of everything. He didn't just create and then He got out of hand. He created fully knowing what He created, and He has, by definition, if He has full knowledge, also full control. Because you only lose control over something that you forget. If I know what's where, I can find it straight away. But if I forget where it is, I start searching and I'm lost. So knowledge is the key to dealing with things as well. So when Allah says He has full knowledge, that means He has full control. None of His creation that He created, even so He made us, it's subservient to us and He made us in charge of it, none of it slips out of His fingers, none of it kind of escapes Him, none of it takes its own course and He isn't aware of it. He retains full control. And so when He says He created it for us, because there is a sort of a little ambivalence or a tension between the two ends. On the one hand, He said He created what is on earth for us. On the other hand, He retains full control. So even though we have control of the earth, we don't have full knowledge. And so we are limited in what we can do with it. We don't fully understand it. He's given it to us to look after. He's given it to us for our benefit, but we don't fully understand it. We still haven't explored our own world to the full. We don't know, and therefore also we can't deal with it. And subsequently we must rely on His guidance of how to deal with it, because He has full knowledge of it. So our control over the earth is, as it were, subject to His rules and His approval. We must govern what He subjected to us on earth in the way He has asked us to do. So if you round it up, this ayat also has a wider message. It tells us that the purpose of creation When Allah gave the earth to us and made us part of that, that He expects from us to live up to that, to be in tune with the purpose of creation. And so then the next ayats after that deal with the creation of man and why man was created and how that creation was received by the angels, what they comment on it, and so on and so forth. So this ayat leads us into the purpose of creation, that creation is purposeful, that Allah has full knowledge and has given authority to us, but this authority is not handing over, it is knowingly giving us a realm to test us. So if you look at that ayat, it is really, and the whole thing is complete, yes, that's where the 7 heavens, and it's a beautiful ayat, and that's why I thought we spent a little bit of time on it. And likewise then we get to the really substance, the key message of the story of creation in the Qur'an after that, because this is after all what we have to understand to know why we're here and where we're going. So the Qur'an now really gets into the depth of it, teaches us about our purpose, our origin, our destiny, and also what our opportunities are and what our pitfalls and downfalls are and what might hinder us from achieving our purpose and reaching our destiny. And that is what we do with the ayats that follow, inshallah.